always, in U.S. history, learn about Ellis Island and the United States being the melting pot, but even prior to the U.S. being a country, when the Spanish arrived in Mexico, the very first boat, there was mestizaje, there was mixing going on from the get-go.
The first recorded, sightings of New Mexico include the fact that there's all this art happening.
We talk about a Spanish tradition, but their tradition too was a mix. The Romans were in Spain, the Moors were there for 700 years. There were other traditions coming into Spain, creating what we call Spanish art. So it was that artwork with those traditions that came into our part of the world. And then, of course, when they got here, mixed with the traditions that are already here, creating very unique New World traditions throughout the Americas.
It would take 6 months to sail from Spain to the port of entry, which was Veracruz, Mexico. It took 6 months to get from Veracruz to Mexico City, and it took another 6 months to get from Mexico City up to Santa Fe.
When we think back about the time period, Santa Fe being founded as a city in 1609, which is very early, we know that families did come up to New Mexico. However, a huge bulk of the population were men, so of course they settled and intermarried, and we had instances historically of men going to actually live on the Pueblo with Pueblo families, and then we have Native Americans living in Spanish villages.
The Pueblo Revolt of 1680 was when all of the Spaniards were actually either killed or booted out of this region of northern New Mexico. And they came back in 1692. And the people who came back were not so interested in looking after gold, but rather tapping roots into this extraordinary habitat up here.
The Hispano ancestry literally goes back to 1598, but been here since forever, because if you look at all the Native American blood all of us New Mexicans have, it's forever. So I tell people my family's been here since forever.
My mom didn't even want to talk about it. I don't know why. And you saw her on that picture I showed you, and she looks Navajo. And then a lot of people, they come here and they ask me, what tribe are you from? And I say, I'm from a tribe of Rafael and Priscilla Lopez. And I said, no, I said, I'm kidding. I don't know what tribe I'm from, I says, but I'm Navajo on my mother's side.
What has continued inviolate is the friendship between the two groups of people, something that is not known to a lot of outsiders.
For the Native Americans and the Hispanics to intertwine, like one says, or to get along so well, I think that's been from way back. So if you needed to trade, your Spanish neighbors from the next community come to see you had this, whether it be seeds or whether you have whether they had a baby there at that Hispanic coming and there was no milk. See, if we had a cow, a goat, or something that they can milk and take it back. Vice versa, next time they're coming back, they bring a little basket or something, or goodies or stuff like that.
My dad recalled wonderful stories about his grandparents. He had a grandparent that was kidnapped by the Navajos in the 1860s when he was out herding the sheep in Galisteo. And they took him away, and he grew up on the reservation, and the young man didn't come back to Santa Fe until he was about 19, through the graces of a Navajo woman who pointed him in the direction of Santa Fe and told him how many suns would have to set before he would get there. And so he had this wonderful story about when his grandfather woke up one day and was out chopping wood, and the wife was inside the house, and she saw this young Indian coming towards her husband, and she took out the musket and was ready to make mincemeat out of him, and it turned out to be their long-lost son who had been kidnapped. So wonderful stories like that were the meat of growing up in a small neighborhood and listening to my dad, who was the story keeper for the family.
The 1700s, we Hispanic people and Pueblo people were at war with the Comanche and the Apache, the nomadic tribes around here, and they would raid our communities, kill men, take women and children, and then we would do it to them. We'd go raid their towns, try to find our women. Sometimes they'd come back with babies from the Indian men, and that's one of the ways we get our Indian blood. But the songs tell these stories, and they're pretty sad songs, but they're beautiful, beautiful, haunting melodies. And again, they just tell stories about what life was like here in the 1700s. And they're told from a woman's perspective about being cautiva, captive.
La cautiva Marcelina, ya se va, ya se la llevan, ya se va, ya se la llevan. Para esas tierras mentadas, de comer carne de yegua a comer.
I'm Roberto Martinez, and I was born in Chacon, New Mexico. My mom and dad decided that we should go to school in Mora, better opportunities than in a one-room school that we had in Chacon. My childhood was very difficult. It was during the Depression. There was no employment. So what happened is that my dad, he'd stay tending the watering, cultivating the crops throughout the summer. And when I say he would, that included me, because you were expected to contribute to the family as soon as you could. Once a month, someone was tasked with holding a dance. And so what would happen, the person would empty one of the largest room in the house. Then, of course, there would be the violin and guitar. And the people would start getting there early in the evening, and that included kids, babies. So you'd see families dancing and a little baby fast asleep under the bench, but other people taking care, looking after him. And my younger brother and sister were attractions in those dances, because my mom taught them and they'd go back and forth and they'd turn around, and so they performed without knowing it. But my biggest influence in the music was my uncle Flavio. He was a handsome looking guy that captivated girls, and people just loved him. He had a nice, beautiful voice, and he also composed. He was an outstanding composer of songs. And I think that I can thank him for, first of all, motivating me, and then I must have gotten some of his genes because I was able to compose, to play, and to sing.
I started playing violin at about that age in elementary school, Grant Elementary. My dad put me in his group, Los Reyes de Albuquerque, as a violin player. I started progressing more when I was about 9 and 10, and he'd actually let me practice back there. And I always wondered how his trumpet player, Ray Flores, how he could improvise these arrangements and stuff. I'd tell Ray, how do you do that? He goes, Lorenzo, he goes, you're gonna get it. You're gonna feel it someday. You have to feel it, you know. Feel this. You'll get it. You'll see. Just keep going, keep going. And
fui a tu casa y no te vi. ¿Quién me lo manda? Yo me dormí. Yo fui a tu casa, tu mamá salió. Salió tu papá y me regañó.
I'm Rob Martinez, and I'm the youngest of 5, and I come from a musical family. What can I say? I remember growing up seeing my dad in his traje, the mariachi suit, going to play, always going after he worked at the base to go make money for the family. The romancero tradition was brought from Spain all over the Americas when the Spaniards came here. And out of that tradition, over the centuries, came the corrido, or ballad, which, you know, if you go to Mexico, there are corridos about Pancho Villa, about the revolution, or about any event that takes place that tells the story of a community. Same thing with here in New Mexico. My dad has written corridos about soldiers who have died for our country, people like Daniel Fernandez, or events like the Tierra Maria courthouse raid, dealing with the controversy of land grants in this part of the world. Definitely part of our history. So corridos are ballads that tell these stories, and my father writes them. There were Americans coming in here illegally in the 1820s on what would become the Santa Fe Trail, and we would go over there illegally to trade because economics always drive these sort of movements, and these folks were bringing their violins and they were bringing their melodies, and some of these guys were from Scotland or had families from Scotland or Germany or Ireland, and they brought their music, and that makes its way into our musical tradition too. That's what makes it interesting, I think.
I claim that my children, my grandchildren, get their musical abilities from Ramona and Ramona's side of the family.
All my family of origin was musical on my mother's side. My grandfather played violin, and his brother played guitar. And I actually saw my mother play guitar.
Fui a tu casa y no te vi. ¿Quién me lo manda? Yo me dormí. Yo fui a tu casa, tu mamá salió. Salió tu papá y me regañó.
My name is Irvin Trujillo, and I was born in Los Alamos, New Mexico. So we'd spend the weekdays at Los Alamos while my parents went to work at the labs. And then the weekends we'd come to Chimayo and we'd work a farm. My grandmother's name was Francisquita Ortega. She was blind. She's from the Ortega family, which is one of the other weaving families here in New Mexico. The Trujillo family, which I am part of, is also known as a weaving family in New Mexico, here in Chimayo. The tradition goes from the Spanish period. The weavings are what we call Rio Grande or Old Rio Grande, and this is weaving along the Rio Grande Valley, and Chimayo is a tributary to the Rio Grande. The Mexican period brings an influence from the Saltillo Sarape, which was a wearing piece. It wasn't a blanket. The Vallero is a style of weaving that evolved with an influence of the railroad. The train basically brought wool from mills in the eastern part of the United States. The Vallero incorporates the 8-pointed star, which you see right here in this piece.